The mess hall buzzed with the usual lunchtime noise. Metal trays clanging, chairs scraping, voices rising in laughter and challenge. At one of the tables, a young woman sat quietly, her eyes sharp and steady, even as the storm of mockery swirled around her. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Kane, call sign Viper. She was among the very first women to earn a spot in the Navy SEALs, and that fact alone painted a target on her back. Around her sat men hardened by years of grueling training, men who spoke the names of legends, Chris Kyle, Andy McNabb, William Fairbairn, as if they were myths carved into stone. To them, Sarah was an outsider, a curiosity. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The taunts came in waves, subtle at first, then sharper. One recruit leaned forward, his grin dripping with arrogance. "Tell me, Viper," he said, tapping his fork on the table, "when was the last time you carried a man twice your size out of a firefight?" "Oh, that's right. You never have." Laughter erupted around him. Another chimed in. "She's probably here because the Navy needs good headlines. Next thing you know, they'll be recruiting ballerinas." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or snap back. She simply chewed her food, her silence more unsettling than any retort. She had faced worse before. The smirks, the disbelief, the doubt that shadowed her every step since day one of training. But Sarah had learned long ago that silence, when sharpened, could be deadlier than any blade. The room grew louder, the jeers sharper, until one recruit, broad-shouldered and smug, slammed his tray down with a clatter that silenced a few voices. He stood pointing at her with a half-smile. "How about we put this to the test right here and now? Mess hall combat drill, no excuses. Let's see if you're more than just a press release." The others cheered, pounding the tables. Sarah's eyes lifted, meeting his without a flicker of hesitation. "Fine," she said quietly, her voice steady as stone. 45 seconds. The room erupted in disbelief. 45 seconds? Someone echoed, laughing. "She thinks she's Jason Bourne." Without another word, Sarah rose from her seat. The mess hall was quickly cleared of trays and chairs, leaving a wide-open space. Weapons officers stationed nearby, always prepared for sudden drills, handed out training rifles and rubber knives. It was supposed to be just another harmless simulation, a test of reflexes, speed, and tactics. But for Sarah, it was more than that. This was where the mocking ended. 3 recruits stepped forward, grinning with confidence. "This'll be fun," one of them muttered. They fanned out around her, circling like wolves. Sarah inhaled slowly, feeling the hum of energy settle in her veins. She remembered her training, the long nights, the relentless drills where failure meant starting from zero. She remembered studying the brutal knife combat techniques once taught by William Fairbairn, the British commando who had trained some of the deadliest warriors of World War II. She remembered why her call sign was Viper, quick, precise. Deadly. The signal was given. The first man lunged, training knife flashing. Sarah sidestepped, twisting his arm in a blur of motion. A sharp elbow strike dropped him to one knee before he even realized what had happened. The second recruit came charging in with his rifle raised for a mock strike, but Sarah pivoted low, sweeping his legs from under him. He hit the floor with a thud, breath exploding from his lungs. The third man hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. Sarah was already on him, knife in hand, pressing the dull rubber blade against his throat before he could blink. He froze, eyes wide, 10 seconds gone. The first recruit scrambled back to his feet, anger in his eyes. He rushed her again, faster this time. Sarah spun, her movements fluid, catching his wrist and twisting until the knife clattered from his grip. A swift knee to the stomach folded him in half. 25 seconds. The second man tried to recover, swinging his rifle like a club. Sarah ducked under the arc, grabbing the barrel and wrenching it free. With one motion, she spun it back against his chest, pinning him to the wall. He froze, gasping. 35 seconds. Only one remained, the arrogant leader who had started it all. He charged with raw power, trying to tackle her outright. But Sarah dropped low, driving her shoulder into his midsection, using his own momentum against him. He hit the floor hard, and before he could recover, she was kneeling on his chest, blade pressed firmly against his collarbone. 45 seconds. Exactly. The room fell silent. The laughter, the jeers, the smirks, they evaporated into stunned silence. Soldiers who had once mocked her sat frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide as they replayed what they had just witnessed. 3 men disarmed, 1 pinned, all within the time, she promised. Sarah rose without a word, offering her hand to the man on the ground. Hesitantly, he took it, shame burning in his eyes. She helped him up, then stepped back, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say a thing. The silence of the mess hall said it all. At the edge of the room, a figure had been watching quietly. A senior officer, one who carried the weight of decades in his gaze. Admiral William McRaven, the man who had once overseen the raid that brought down Osama bin Laden, stepped forward. His presence alone commanded silence. He studied Sarah, then looked at the room. "Mock her again," he said, his voice sharp as a blade, "and you'll be eating through a straw. She's a SEAL, through and through." The words landed heavier than any punch. The men who had laughed minutes before now stared with newfound respect, their earlier arrogance shattered. Sarah simply nodded, returning to her seat as if nothing had happened. The mess hall remained hushed, the echoes of her victory hanging in the air. From that day forward, no one mocked Lieutenant Sarah Viper Kane again. She had proven herself, not with words but with action. In 45 seconds, she had silenced doubt, crushed arrogance, and earned a respect that would never again be questioned. And in that silence, a new legend was born. The mess hall at the forward operating base was a strange mix of comfort and tension. Soldiers laughed, traded stories, and wolfed down food on metal trays. But beneath the chatter was always the awareness that the world outside was a battlefield. Among them sat Ensign Rachel Torres, her dark hair tied back, her expression calm, her eyes always scanning. To most of the men at the base, she was an oddity. She was a Navy SEAL, part of the elite Team 6, and though her records told a story of courage and sacrifice, whispers in the hall painted her as something else entirely. To them, she wasn't like Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor, or Jock Lewis, one of the founders of the SAS. She wasn't a war hero forged in fire and blood. She was, they thought, a political statement, a symbol, someone brought in because the Navy needed to prove a point. They laughed about it when they thought she wasn't listening. Sometimes they laughed about it even when she was right there. On this day, the jeering was louder than usual. One soldier leaned back in his chair, a grin tugging at his lips. "So tell me, Shadow," he said, using her call sign with mocking emphasis, "when was the last time you carried a man out of combat under fire?" "Oh, wait, you probably never have. Not unless it was part of a photo op." The table around him roared with laughter. Another chimed in, "Yeah, maybe they'll send her to Hollywood next. Play the part of a Navy SEAL in a movie. She'd probably be better at that." Rachel didn't answer. She lifted her tray, moved to another table, and sat in silence. To her, their words were nothing new. She had heard it all in training, in deployment, even in whispers from senior officers who didn't think she deserved the trident pinned to her chest. But Rachel Torres was not one to explain herself. She had learned that words meant little. Respect in her world was earned only in action. Then the sirens blared. The mess hall went from laughter to chaos in a heartbeat, a drill alarm. But it was designed to simulate the real thing. A red light flashed across the ceiling, and a voice boomed through the speakers. "Simulated enemy infiltration. All units respond." The room jolted into motion as men scrambled for their gear. Training weapons, simunition rifles, rubber knives, all stored in armories nearby, now being pulled out in haste. The drill was meant to test reaction time, discipline, and combat readiness. But as the chaos grew, Rachel was the first to move, with purpose. She dropped her tray, slid across the room, and picked up a training M4 rifle. Her movements were fluid, precise, deliberate. She didn't bark orders, didn't draw attention to herself, but within seconds, she was positioned at the entry point of the hall, her weapon raised. The others looked at her with surprise, some with disdain. "Oh, look," one soldier muttered. "Shadow thinks she's leading the charge." But then the door slammed open and the simulation began. Targets entered. Mock infiltrators, armed with rubber rifles and pads, moving fast and aggressive. Rachel didn't hesitate. The first infiltrator burst through, rifle raised. Rachel's M4 barked with sim rounds, 3 sharp pops to the chest. The man dropped instantly. She pivoted without pause, her eyes scanning, her finger light on the trigger. Another target appeared from the left flank, sprinting low. Rachel moved to cover, angled her rifle, and fired a controlled burst. The target fell, tagged out. The room exploded into movement. Soldiers scrambled, some diving for cover, others firing wildly, but their shots went astray. Rachel was already moving, sliding low across the floor, cutting angles like she had done in countless hours of close-quarters training. Her style mirrored the teachings of Colonel Charles Beckwith, founder of Delta Force. Fast, precise, ruthless efficiency. In 10 seconds, she had dropped 4 infiltrators. In 20 seconds, she was through the center of the hall, clearing corners, switching to her rubber knife when her rifle jammed. With the blade in hand, she closed distance on another target, twisting him into a chokehold before tossing him to the ground. The soldiers around her froze, their rifles half raised, unsure if they should follow her lead or stay out of her way. Rachel didn't notice. She was lost in the rhythm of battle, each movement instinctive, each strike clean. Her knife found throats, her rifle found chests, her boots found knees. By 30 seconds, half the infiltrators were down. By 40, only 2 remained. Rachel sprinted across the hall, dove into cover, rolled, and came up firing. The first target fell. She spun, knife flashing, and drove the dull blade against the chest of the final infiltrator. 45 seconds. Exactly. Silence fell over the hall. The laughter, the whispers, the mocking grins, all of it died in the space of a breath. Every soldier who had laughed at her sat frozen, their rifles limp in their hands, their jaws slack as they watched her stand in the middle of the room, chest rising and falling steadily. Rachel lowered her weapon, her face unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't boast. She simply moved to the side, as if the performance had meant nothing to her. But to the men watching, it meant everything. They had seen her dismantle an entire infiltration in less than a minute, moving faster and cleaner than most of them could ever hope to. At the back of the room, a veteran Master Chief who had watched, in silence, finally stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of years in combat, the kind of authority that cut deeper than rank. He looked at the soldiers, then at Rachel. "She reminds me of Kyle in Ramadi," he said, his voice calm, measured. "Deadly. Efficient. You don't have to like her, but you'd better respect her, because she's the future of special operations, the yay." Silence deepened. Not one man dared to laugh now, not one dared to look away. The weight of respect hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Rachel simply nodded, holstered her knife, and walked back to her seat. She didn't need their approval. She had earned something far greater. From that day forward, the mocking stopped. No one whispered that she didn't belong. No one joked about Hollywood or photo ops. They had seen the truth with their own eyes, and it was impossible to deny. Ensign Rachel "Shadow" Torres had silenced them in the only language they truly understood: action. And in 45 seconds, a new legend had been written in the halls of the Navy SEALs.